Welcome to 1337. Welcome to the future.
On April 3rd, the message hit U.S. Central Command. An American F-15E Strike Eagle, call sign Dude 44, was down in hostile Iranian territory. Both crew members safely ejected before their aircraft hit the ground, but the violent chaos of the bailout separated them by miles of difficult terrain. While the pilot was located and extracted within just 6 hours, the second airman remained missing. That left the Weapons System Officer, or WESO, alone and bleeding from his injuries. To give his communications equipment a chance of reaching friendly receivers, he had to drag himself up a craggy 7,000-foot mountain. The U.S. military was suddenly thrust into an impossible race. They were operating blind, knowing only that their stranded airman was somewhere on that massive ridgeline, attempting to evade capture. On the ground, the hunt was already on. The Iranian regime wanted to capture the American alive to secure a massive propaganda victory on national television. To speed up the search, they weaponized the local economy. The regime offered a bounty of $66,000, a staggering sum that equals 734 times the local monthly minimum wage. This incentive mobilized an entire population. Armed civilians flooded the mountains, forming a massive dragnet that began sweeping toward the WSO's position. With the search parties closing in, the WSO made a final tactical choice. Armed with only a small handgun, he wedged himself into a narrow rock crevice, hoping to stay hidden. Between the brutal geography and the thousands of hunters searching for a life-changing payday, the ridgeline had become a rapidly closing death trap. At CENTCOM, U.S. officials sat in agonizing silence. For 14 hours, the WSO was labeled status unknown, with no way to confirm if he was even still alive. His only lifeline was the Combat Survivor Evader Locator, or CSEL. It's a specialized 800-gram beacon strapped to his survival vest that transmits encrypted coordinates. But using the device was a lethal gamble. Every intermittent pulse sent to summon help also risked revealing his exact location to the Iranian hunters. He used the transmitter sparingly, pulsing signals from the darkness of his crevice. Finally, 14 hours into the ordeal, U.S. operators secured a confirmed digital lock on his location. That single lock changed everything. The mission shifted from a desperate search into the launch of an overwhelming offensive operation. Because the WSO was deep inside hostile territory, a quiet extraction was impossible. The military had to build a task force capable of punching through a modern air defense network. They pulled in the heavy hitters. A-10C Thunderbolt IIs were assigned for close air support to keep Iranian ground forces pinned down. The extraction would be handled by HH-60W Jolly Green II helicopters, supported by HC-130J coordination planes circling high above. The final arithmetic of the rescue was staggering. To pull one man off a mountain, the military committed over 150 aircraft and 200 individual munitions. Iran had already proven it could down a premier U.S. jet. To prevent a secondary disaster, the U.S. had to deploy an Armada that was too large to be challenged. As the roaring U.S. fleet crossed the border, the WSO sat in total silence in his crevice, listening to the sounds of the search parties nearby. Iranian ground forces were now physically combing the exact ridgeline where he was hidden, drawing within feet of his position. To buy the ground team the time they needed, U.S. jets executed a massive, coordinated aerial distraction miles away, pulling the hunters' attention elsewhere. In that moment of confusion, the Jolly Green IIs swooped into the mountainside and successfully pulled the WSO from his hiding place. It was a successful needle thread between a closing civilian net and an overwhelming display of air power. Looking at the risk, you have to ask why U.S. leadership chose to gamble an entire fleet of aircraft for a single officer. If the Iranian air defenses had scored another hit, the mission could have ended with over 100 dead Americans instead of a single rescue. But for the commander-in-chief, the math of risk was superseded by a sacred vow. In the U.S. military, leaving an American behind is simply not an option. The U.S. military proves its strength through an uncompromising willingness to unleash its entire collective force to bring a single airman home. To execute Operation Epic Fury, The United States military amassed a strike package of 155 aircraft just outside Iranian airspace, 64 fighter jets, 48 refueling tankers, 4 heavy bombers, and dozens of support craft idled at the edge of a contested border. Yet the objective for this massive armada was incredibly narrow. They were not initiating a full-scale invasion. They were tasked with retrieving exactly one person, a downed weapons systems officer, or WSO. Finding him meant searching the Zagros Mountain range, a sprawling, jagged expanse of elevated rock and deep ravines, where a single human effectively vanishes into the terrain. This presents an operational paradox. A search and rescue mission is inherently defensive, but extracting a target from a heavily defended, hostile nation requires an overwhelming offensive force to suppress anti-air batteries and ground patrols. The military's Combat Survivor Evader Locator, or C-cell beacon, provided the initial lead. However, while the beacon alerted command to the pilot's general vicinity, it only provided a macro location. It narrowed the search down to a single large mountain, but lacked the precise coordinates necessary for a rapid helicopter extraction. Solving this required Joint All-Domain Command and Control, known as JDAT-2. This is the foundational architecture the military uses to merge intelligence, air assets, and ground forces into a single real-time communication network. Extracting a target from a denied environment is no longer a matter of a lone helicopter swooping in under the radar. It demands synchronized multi-domain force designed to temporarily paralyze the enemy's ability to react. The baseline C-cell signal created a wide probability radius. For conventional search and rescue teams, scanning a grid this large would take days, time the stranded WSO did not have. To close this intelligence gap, Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe activated the CIA. He directed the agency to deploy both human assets and specialized, highly advanced technologies to the region. These capabilities fall under covert action authorities. This legal status allows the CIA to deploy human assets and surveillance technologies, such as specialized mountain scanning cameras, outside the transparent protocols and standard reporting cycles of conventional military intelligence units. Looking at this topographical map, the wide circle indicates the C-cell probability radius. To narrow this down, the CIA deployed advanced camera telemetry, represented by this scanning vector beam, to systematically sweep the specific mountain face identified by the beacon. The operators initially spotted what appeared to be the head of a human being hidden in the rocks. They maintained their lock on the static terrain, watching the exact same position for 45 minutes. When the figure stood up and moved, the camera telemetry instantly locked onto the motion. This generated a precise, actionable geolocation for the extraction team. By layering military radio signals with multi-agency technological surveillance, the intelligence network compressed the massive search grid. They turned a geographic needle in a haystack into exact coordinates. Knowing the target's location was only the first step. Prior to launching any rescue craft, the U.S. had to establish a secure, temporary staging area deep inside hostile territory. This concept is known in military doctrine as a FARP, a forward arming and refueling point. It serves as the physical anchor for the mission, providing fuel, ammunition, and a transfer point for extraction forces. Well before the extraction commenced, Air Force Special Tactics teams had covertly surveyed multiple Iranian runways and airfields to identify viable landing zones. As this schematic details, the military selected a small, remote agricultural crop spraying strip in the central Isfahan province. It offered the minimum required dimensions to land heavy transport aircraft, specifically the MC-130J Commando II. However, there is an inherent mismatch between the massive weight of a military transport and the fragility of an agricultural runway. Data on soil compaction and erosion indicated the ground was highly unstable. Recent weather patterns had eroded the soil significantly, presenting a severe operational risk. The ground simply lacked the mow-bearing integrity required for repeated heavy landings. This multi-domain operation rested on the physical stability of a single runway. High-tech warfare remains bound by basic geography and mud. With the target located and the FARP established, the 155 aircraft strike package moved in. This force was heavily weighted with fighters, refueling tankers, and dedicated rescue craft. It also included 4 heavy bombers. Deploying strategic bombers for a mission designed to save a single life appears deeply contradictory. The strategy here relied on kinetic deception. This doctrine employs explosive force to manipulate enemy behavior and command decisions. Looking at the map of the Esfahan province, the first use of force was pure suppression. The bombers dropped heavy munitions directly onto the access roads leading to the WSO's location, creating physical craters to block Iranian ground vehicles from reaching the site. The volume of explosives used to close this net was immense. U.S. forces dropped roughly 100 munitions, each weighing 2,000 pounds, just to sever the immediate roadways. The second application of force was subterfuge. The U.S. launched coordinated strikes against 7 distinct locations, far away from the WSO. The logic was simple. Explosions elsewhere forced Iran to widen its search grid and split its military response. Coordinated confusion took hold. Thousands of Iranian searchers and military personnel mobilized, driving their forces into regions where the target simply was not located. Parallel to the air campaign, the CIA ran a psychological operation on the ground inside Iran. Operatives leaked false intelligence, claiming that the downed aircrew had already been found. This effectively stripped the financial motivation from local Iranian bounty hunters, convincing them that continuing the search was useless. The bombing runs engineered massive target misdirection, clearing an uncontested path for the extraction team. With the area isolated, elite Navy SEALs dropped into the hostile terrain via MH-6 Special Operations helicopters to physically secure the target. The SEALs successfully located the WSO, extracted him from the mountainside, and flew back to the temporary agricultural FARP in Isfahan. But military operations rarely survive contact with reality. This is tactical friction, the moment when localized environmental variables derail pristine operational planning. At the FARP, the degraded soil conditions proved disastrous. The C-130 transports, intended as the primary means of escape, sank deep into the eroded mud and became permanently immobilized on the airstrip. Stranded, the SEALs executed the rigid doctrine of asset denial. To prevent highly classified military technology from falling into Iranian hands, they detonated their own stranded C-130s, along with their MH-6 choppers. Concurrent friction hit elsewhere in the airspace. While engaged in a parallel rescue mission, an A-10 pilot took heavy enemy fire. The pilot managed to limp into friendly airspace and eject safely, but the multi-million-dollar airframe was destroyed. With their primary exfiltration route burning on the runway, the SEALs relied on systemic redundancy. A Plan B trio of backup aircraft arrived, retrieved the Special Forces and the wounded WSO, and successfully delivered them to safety in Kuwait. In heavily denied environments, meticulous planning cannot eliminate friction. Instead, building deliberate redundancy into the operation ensures that unpredictable failures do not result in fatal outcomes. This dashboard illustrates the final ledger. Despite deploying 155 aircraft deep into hostile territory, the U.S. sustained 0 human casualties. However, preserving that life required a massive physical and financial toll, shown by the loss of multiple helicopters, transports, and an attack aircraft. From the Iranian perspective, the operation offered a significant propaganda victory, stemming from their ability to shoot down the initial F-15 that sparked the crisis. Yet, that propaganda victory masks a profound strategic failure. The massive U.S. response entirely stripped Iran of the opportunity to secure a high-value American hostage. The immediate geopolitical fallout resulted in a temporary de-escalation. The administration declared a conditional 2-week ceasefire. This pause carried a strict stipulation. Iran must reopen the vital shipping lanes of the Strait of Hormuz for the ceasefire to hold. While U.S. leadership claimed the mission proved overwhelming air dominance, the initial downing of an advanced F-15 clearly demonstrates that Iranian airspace remains highly lethal and heavily defended. The threat of escalation remains immediate. Squadrons of F-22 Raptor stealth fighters are staged in the region, ready to strike if the ceasefire is breached. Securing a target behind hostile lines requires overwhelming synchronized chaos to force an opening. Sometimes you have to break the board to save a single piece.
Thanks for watching. Tap into 1337studio.ai